back with Deep Images. How are you guys doing tonight?
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Right. And we are going to be continuing our look at crime films. And I got with me tonight Mark Baranowski,
Yes, sir. Mark Baranowski. Good to see you
aka at
guys.
times the Marksman
Yep.
or the Marquis. And I got Chris Gilpin, veteran zine maestro here. So and I'm Henry Covert. So we're going to continue this series on crime films. We've got some interesting choices we want to throw at you. So I'm going to start this time around. I am going to cover A Better Tomorrow by the once great John Woo. And
Yeah.
sorry, John, it's just, come on, man.
Yeah.
All right. So Better Tomorrow, the romanization in the Jut Ping, which is the kind of romanization of Chinese names, is pronounced Jing Hong Bun Sik. So, but it also means literally true colors. So that's the translation. A Better Tomorrow, was something affixed on it for the export market, and it's become totally synonymous, as with a lot of these movies. So this film, Jing Hung Boon Sik, this was directed by John Woo, 1986. He also co-wrote it with these interesting guys, Chen Hung Ka and Leong Suk Hwa. And Choi Hark produced it with just John Woo. Now, of course, Choi Hark kind of broke big with Zoo Warriors of the Magic Mountain in 1980, I believe, which kind of was brought the wuxia movie into the modern day with the wire fu and more magic elements. And of course, that movie was heavily, I won't say it was ripped off, but because he acknowledged it. But John Carpenter heavily acknowledged Wu with Big Trouble in Little China, and I thought he did a good job of approximating the vibe of those movies. So Choi Hark, by that time, he'd also done like We Are Going to Eat You and a bunch of really bizarre horror and fantasy and black magic movies. So he was in pretty good position as a producer by, 85, 86. John Woo had only done a handful of movies. He did a Shaw Brothers movie. I think he did have Sword Will Travel, which is pretty good. I like those early movies he did. They're just kind of a different vibe, but so he wasn't like a spring chicken, but Choi Hart kind of gave him the opportunity to do a script in the way he wanted to do a melodramatic action film. And that became A Better Tomorrow. And A Better Tomorrow became a template for a whole subgenre, sometimes called heroic bloodshed in Hong Kong. And, the main features of those movies are usually have two male characters. A lot of times they're on the opposite sides of the law. Sometimes they're brothers on the opposite sides of the law, as in the one I'm about to talk about. But they have this bond. It's this kind of male bond. Some have described it as homoerotic. I think it skirts that, but I don't really think that's the intention per se. It's just that Wu is portraying which was kind of a radical idea, that these seasoned gangsters had this very sensitive, tender, poetic side. Now, since then, that's become used on tons of characters. Probably the most popular example in the world right now is Wolverine. A ruthless killer who has the soul of a poet, to quote one of the comics on him. And it's a cool trope. So this is kind of where this one goes. This one has Tai Lung, who was a veteran of a ton of kung fu and swordplay Hong Kong movies. He was kind of starting to approach middle age at this point. He plays the older of two brothers. His character's named Ho. He has a younger brother, Kit, played by Leslie Cheung. This is one of Leslie's first movies, and he went on to do a ton of great movies until, sadly, he committed suicide about 20 years ago. And his character is heterosexual for what it's worth. He has a girlfriend played by Emily Chu, played by Emily Chu, named Jackie. And but in reality, Leslie Chung was a homosexual man, and there's still a period when China that wasn't really talked about. So he was in the closet for a number of years. And then he did do the movie Happy Together by Wong Kar-wai. And Wong Kar-wai has him and Tony Leung, who's a straight man, both playing gay men who are in a very tempestuous, sexualized, and frankly abusive, dysfunctional relationship. But it's still there was such a paucity of gay themes in Chinese movies that even though the relationship is pretty fucked up, uh, this movie has been heralded by LGBTQ fans and critics around the world since then as a breakthrough gay theme movie. And I mean, Wong Kar Wai wasn't even that well known when it came out. I mean, he'd done like Chungking Express, but it played in Charlotte. I wanted to go for a week. I wanted to go see it, but I didn't get to go. Now I have it on Blu-ray. But anyway, in that movie, Leslie finally played a gay character, and then after a few years after that, for whatever reason, he became consumed with self-hatred and hung himself to death. So, but anyway, this is one of his early roles. He's really good in this. He is a very young, handsome, very delicate featured guy. I think I could see a lot of women and men like swooning over him. And he plays Kit, Ho's brother, and Kit is just out of high school, and he immediately goes into the police academy, not knowing that his older brother Ho is a gangster. He's actually one of the highest ranking in their scene, which this is a counterfeit bill operation. And I have wondered if it was a little influenced by To Live and Die in LA, which came out a year earlier by William Friedkin. Similar kind of operation, totally different kind of movie, except that they're both crime and action, but different vibe. But they were both very 80s in their own different ways. The lighting, the music, it's just very much of their time, which is, not a bad thing in this case. Um, so in A Better Tomorrow, Ho hasn't told Kid, his brother, that he's a gangster, and their father is this kind of curmudgeonly guy with really bad health, and he alternates between the hospital and being kind of cared for at home by Kit's girlfriend Jackie. And at first, it takes a little bit to understand the relations between some of these characters, because colloquially, a lot of the characters in these Hong Kong movies from this period call each other brother, and they're not actually blood brothers, and they call each other cousin when they're not blood cousins. Occasionally, as in Wong Kar Wai's first film, As Tears Go By, also a crime film, with also a romance film, the protagonists played by Andy Lau and Maggie Cheung in her breakthrough role. They were first cousins biologically, but they become lovers in the movie. Fantastic movie, by the way. But John Woo was before all that. John Woo influenced Wong Kar Wai. He influenced Ringo Lam. He influenced everybody. And Choi Hark, basically just gave him the venue and the distribution. By the time we get to it, the sequels, Choi Hark wanted to kind of take over because of the financial success. But in this movie, it's definitely a partnership. Choi Hark didn't write any of the movie. He just produced it and made sure it came to the attention. And it was a giant hit in Hong Kong, which brings us to our third character, Mark Lee, which has become an iconic character in this, not only in this spawning this subgenre, but in all of crime and action movies worldwide, especially in Asia, but definitely worldwide. And you got to remember there's a couple of billion people in Asia. So, you know, Mark Lee is Chow Yun Fat, and Chow Yun Fat had been a soap opera actor and then a TV movie actor. And he was like 29 when he was approached to this movie, and he had a following, but he'd never really broken in any kind of feature film. So Mark Lee is a breakthrough character, and between John Woo and Chow Yun Fat, they worked out the mannerisms of this character. He does a lot of iconic things in this movie. He's a hitman. He works with Ho on the money laundering thing, though he doesn't actually do any. Neither of them do the technical stuff. Ho oversees the kind of stuff that Willem Dafoe was like the indie counterfeiter. He did it all by his own hands, and that's fascinating in To Live and Die in LA because they actually show how you do it. So I'm wondering if that led to Horizon. But it looks pretty authentic in this movie too. But it's just the hook. It's not really the engine of the plot, but it does show that there's the people around this operation are not extremely violent criminals, but they can be violent when they need to enforce their territory or whatever. So Ho, Tai Lung's character, has gotten in a position where he's really not killing people anymore, but he is walking around. He's rich. He's got a sweet outfit and long trench coat, and he just looks cool. And Mark is beside him, like in case something goes wrong, Mark's gonna level the fucking hammer on somebody. Um, and but they're like brothers too, and they have a, I would say their brotherly relationship is not biological, but it's just as, if not tighter, than him with his brother Kit, his real brother, because as tight as him and Kit are, they are several years apart in age, and again, Kit doesn't know his brother's a criminal yet, and he doesn't want him to know, but the dad's like, you should tell him, and Kit's probably, Hill's probably thinking, what the fuck? But he doesn't tell him, but he agrees to retire after this big job with the counterfeit trade off money uh, in Taiwan. And so him and Mark are kind of building up to this, and they get this cat named Xing, who's kind of like a neophyte in the business. And Xing, you can tell from the actor, the way he's kind of playing it, that Xing is not to be trusted. He just has this kind of, his vibe is not the same as these other characters. He's not like, he's like, he keeps his lips kind of tight because he's not to be trusted. He doesn't want them to be let on to that, though. He's in it for himself. He wants to take Ho's place on the food chain. Um, and in time, not too much time, he gets that opportunity. And he basically, even though you're not totally confirmed of it till late in the movie, he basically tips off some folks, and him and Ho go on the run. And then Ho's like, you leave, I'll deal with this or whatever. So it's at that point, um, if I'm correct, Ho is busted, and then Ho has to go to prison for 3 years. And in that 3 years, Kit hates him because the gang, when they come for Ho, because of this fuck up, they do kill the father of Ho and Kit. And though he puts up quite a fight for an old dude, I have to say, he takes a couple with him, but um, so Ho's in prison. Kit hates him. He's disowned him. Kit's married his girlfriend Jackie, who is a musician, and Mark has just kind of disappeared, and it turns out Mark has kind of gone, kind of hiding in plain sight. He's basically, because what he does is right around the time that Ho goes to prison, he decides he's going to avenge this situation. So this is the first time in the movie where you see the Chow Yun Fat Mark Lee character in action. So he's got this long trench coat, he's got the sunglasses, he's burning money, fake bills, to be fair, though you never know that from the stills. And he just he has a toothpick. He's got all these mannerisms that became iconic, and everybody thinks Mark is cool. And really, Mark is a kind guy. He just don't mess with him. So when Ho gets set up, and no one really knows it's Shing's fault, though Shing very quickly works up the food chain and becomes a leader. Um, but right before that happens, Mark decides he's going to get revenge for this situation, and he goes to where these guys are hanging out in a restaurant. And this is where you have this first kind of iconic Hong Kong bloodshed, heroic bloodshed, bullets and bloodshed scene where he starts making out with these women in the restaurant, picking them up, and they kind of like, they're drunk. I don't think he's drunk, and they start going down this hallway where there's all these potted plants, and he plants a 9mm gun in every in every plant, and when he gets to the end of the hall and the women go away, he goes into the doorway and confronts these fuckers, and he immediately starts just wiping them out. And as he backs that out through the hallway, he grabs a gun. I mean, he shoots the gun until it runs out of ammo, grabs the gun out of the plant, and then boom, boom, boom. And the shots in this movie, like the gunshots, they're very loud. They're louder than any movie I think made before that for a gunshot. They're just like insanely loud. They sound like a bullet's going right in your ear, and it's very effective, and it's very one after the other. And he has like the two-handed 9mm, which became iconic too, and all these moves. And unfortunately, when he's about to get away after he's running out of guns, but he's wiped out most of these people. I mean, I think he's killed almost every one of them, but there's one guy who's not quite dead, and he's crawling around, and he shoots Mark in the leg. So Mark gets away, but what we find of time has passed 3 years while Ho's been in prison is Mark basically becomes like a menial laborer. He doesn't have any confidence that he can do crime or any of this kind of stuff anymore, and he's on the outs with the mob. But Shing, now the boss and kind of sleazy as hell, Shing employs him as basically gives him work like, you know, basically clean my car, polish my car, and here's a tip of $500, and he drops part of it on the ground, and poor Mark is like, he's limping, he's wearing this brace inside of his pants, keeping his legs straight, and he's like bending over trying to get every little bill, and it that kind of marks the Mark character. Mark becomes kind of in his own mind a loser, no good, and of course they pick on him all the time too, and after a while it's just a little much, and so when Ho gets out of prison, they reunite, and Ho's like, yeah, I've retired, I'm not doing crime anymore, that's it. And Mark's like, man, I've been waiting for you for 3 years. And this real famous scene where he pours out his guts, and he's like, I'm tired of people seeing me as a nobody. This translation varies for different subtitles, different prints, but it's become a scene that became a meme in China, which I didn't know that until recently, like this week. But there's a animated beaver from some Disney Pixar kind of movie, and I think they did animate the meme themselves, imitating this style. And it's pretty well animated. He's kind of this homely anthropomorphic beaver, and they call him the Chinese beaver. And the Chinese beaver, basically, these memes, they're distributed in Hong Kong and in China, and you know I've only seen one that's subtitled, and yes, he's giving the whole spiel in character that Mark gives to Tai Lung. But he's this animated beaver, and the memes were only in Cantonese. So unless you see the ones with subtitles, it's basically like this a Chinese beaver talking in Chinese, but his dialogue and his mannerisms are the exact scene. So that became a huge meme in Asia. Um, I don't think it quite broke over here, but on YouTube it's got a little traction now. And again, I just learned of this, so it's kind of funny. But because the beaver's like super like melodramatic, like Italian fat, it's ridiculous. And so after that scene, Mark is really like, damn, what the fuck am I gonna do? And so he starts planning to get even with Shing and this gang of counterfeiters. And Ho doesn't want any part of it, and Ho tries to make up with Kit, and Kit's like, fuck you. I mean, Kit is like mean as hell to his brother. He's like, you got our father killed. You're just a sleazy criminal. I'm not your brother. Don't call me brother. Don't call me Kit. Call me officer. And Ho is like, okay, officer. I mean, Ho is like, we'll do anything to win him back, which is just about a lost cause. Jackie, the wife, tries to tell Kit, make up with your brother. He's your brother. And he's like, fuck no. Like, they're getting along fine. And then as soon as she brings up the brother, he just starts cussing his wife out black and blue. He's just like really obstinate and mean about it. Total switch from his earlier, sweet disposition, albeit being a cop. So he is a cop, but he can't get promoted because everyone knows his brother's a criminal now and just served time in prison. So he's just really screwed up Kit's life and Kit's mind. And, Ho has all this guilt, and Tai Lung plays it very melodramatic. The music, it's by this cat named Joseph Coe, and it's very memorable. I mean, it's through the first two Better Tomorrow movies, and it's there are a couple of songs that are sung in Cantonese that are not in the export prints, though. You can find some of them remastered online, and one did have subtitles, but most of them don't. But the music doesn't, lyrics don't have subtitles either. I forgot the name of the singer, but it's Joseph Coe's Joseph Koo. Joseph Koo, Koo. His music and this guy singing. And again, I mean, if you've seen any Hong Kong movies or you've seen these movies, even if it's been like 30 years, you'll recognize this music. Again, it's very 80s. It's basically this really recognizable synthesizer riff. But the songs where the guy's singing, the song parts were cut out of most of the export print. So some of the music, like I have visual aid. I have this one Anchor Bay did. Better Tomorrow. This is one of the early Anchor Bay DVDs, and this is the first time this movie ever came out on DVD in America. Well, DVD had not been around very long at this time, but the print is nice, and it definitely evokes that era of Hong Kong cinematography, but maybe a little too much because it really wasn't restored all that much, surprisingly. Because Anchor Bay, man, they scrub clean all these literally obscure foreign horror movies. This one they didn't do that with. Now I have, again, only in the last week on YouTube seen like some 4K restored footage from these, which is not on a North American Blu-ray yet, amazingly. Um and it's like it's sort of like a different movie, not emotionally, but it's a lot more cinematic than you think it is watching this. I mean, in this one, you appreciate it because it has that kind of washed out 80s. And you know how a lot of times the Hong Kong movies shot through filters, usually blue, and they had like smoke, again, very 80s. All the Hong Kong movies from the early 80s to the end of the 80s, not just crime, but like action and dramas, horror, occult films, they're all shot like that. And I love that look. I absolutely adore it. But some of it, when you clean it up, some of it's not there on purpose. In other words, you see that because those are the imperfections because they haven't been restored. So now they're being restored. You can kind of appreciate those qualities still, but they're not. But you also see a Christmas to the photography, like on the actors, and just it's not as it doesn't look as sloppy. It's not like super slick either. I mean, but this movie was so influential in Hollywood that if you saw the remastered Better Tomorrow and you saw its imitators in modern Hollywood, they look kind of similar. And it's not because Wu had a lot of money like Hollywood does. Right. Hollywood spent money slavishly imitating a guy who had no money. So I still can't quite pull it off usually. So with some exceptions, but just want to get across the importance of this movie. And of course, the usual suspects have all said it's one of their favorites. Obviously, yes, Quentin Tarantino, and then obviously, but Wong Kar-wai has mentioned that, which, like I said, is obvious in his early movies. He got away from crime pretty early on, but Jim Jarmusch has named this as one of his favorite movies. Park Chan-wook, who did Old Boy, has mentioned that Better Tomorrow really changed his life. So it definitely was a commercial and critical hit. It's just nobody in America, except the deep underground bootleggers, knew about it. And that's kind of when that scene was starting in the late 80s. And, I got into the early 90s. So it was, I knew of these movies before I saw them. Better Tomorrow movies were a little hard to find. I did get Better Tomorrow 2 for rent first, out of order, and then I saw the first one. So that kind of was a little, rewatching them in the correct order recently was a little bit of a shock, but it's cool, good context. I rented those, and I rented The Killer first, and Dwayne, our producer, Dwayne Cochran, showed me Hard Boiled. He got a really nice bootleg copy on VHS, and we spent a whole afternoon. I think we watched it at least twice all the way through, if not 3 times. And I got pretty drunk. He had some vodka. I wasn't drinking that much back then, but I was hard. Well, no, that was a later time. We rewatched it when I had the vodka. We also watched Fight Club that day. Very memorable watching that the first time. But when we saw Hard Boiled, that was like 94. So I wasn't drinking then, but it was a trippy vibe. Me and Dwayne were just young. We were having fun. Neither of us had seen a movie like that, because it's even more amped up than The Killer and Better Tomorrow movies. And it's pretty much relentless action, from beginning to end. And like I said, some Hollywood movies have successfully emulated it and a lot haven't. John Woo himself has never been able to emulate these movies, amazingly. He just remade The Killer, which I was mildly curious about, but the reviews are not good. And even the good reviews are kind of like, yeah, it's the best movie he's done since Hard Boiled, but not really. That's not really saying much, And so I don't know if I'll ever see it or not. But yeah, he's having a hard time. The Hong Kong reunification in 1997 fucked up a lot of people's minds. A lot of people were kind of, believe it or not, were spoiled under British colonialism. They were probably the only people in the world who were actually spoiled by it, because they weren't communist, and so to them they had all this freedom. Even though British colonialism is also oppressive, but the British were kind of like, yeah, we're going to lose Hong Kong to the Chinese communists in a few years. Just do whatever the hell you want. So Hong Kong cinema became very bright. It had already been vibrant all through the 60s and 70s, but by the time we get to the 80s and up to the reunification, Hong Kong cinema was, it was a leader. Like I said, it was widely imitated, and John Woo and Choi Hark were two of the most important people, and they kind of showed us in America that, like, wow, you can make some really spectacular action movies for not a lot of money if you know what the hell you're doing, you know.
Absolutely.
And again, now rewatching these movies, I had not watched the Better Tomorrow movies in about 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I don't, they're not on Blu-ray here. So I did pop in the DVDs, and I fell in love all over again. And I started watching the second one, and then I found the remastered prints on YouTube. So I finished watching the second one halfway to the end in the remastered version. I wanted to kind of compare, and I'll talk about Better Tomorrow later on in the series, but Better Tomorrow 2, Better Tomorrow 1, to kind of wrap it up, basically, we end up with, um, Mark tries to turn his life around. Mark decides he's going to get revenge on these guys, even though he's handicapped. And, obviously he still has his gunman skills, and he even starts like running and jumping and dodging, though to their credit, they don't completely have him cured. Like, he does that for a little bit, but they kind of make it clear it's adrenaline, because shortly after that, he starts limping around a lot again. It's not like Fred Williamson in the Black Caesar movies. They break his shin bone in the first movie when he's a kid, and he limps all through Black Caesar. Then in
Right.
Hell Up in Harlem, after he's miraculously life saved by a hair,
Yep.
um, then by the end of the movie, he's like literally running like a track star to chase a guy on planes across the country. Even to the where he ain't gonna stop and buy the ticket. He like jumps in the luggage drop off and rolls down it and gets off, and it's like, I'm gonna get this motherfucker. So all across the country, and Fred, a real life athlete, is like running like a motherfucker, and it's
Right.
totally forgotten that he has a limp, and probably Larry and Cohen's like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, Fred, can't afford to reshoot it, keep going. you know? But I just chalk it up as when he came back from the dead, his leg healed somehow. So it's one of those things the literalists would hate. You just got to go with it. Both are great, great movies, by the way. Um, but so Chow, you are where he's handicapped, but he does get kind of spry for a while, and definitely he kills a lot of fucking people. And basically, he's covering for Ho to kind of get away, and he's going to go with him, and they're going to take all this money from these guys, of course, and their plan starts to succeed. Kit is on their case, and of course Kit, while he's on their case and on the counterfeiter's case, he's putting himself in danger. And so they kind of have to, Mark kind of saves Kit, and Kit's not down with it, and Mark, he gets blown away. I mean, it takes a lot of bullets. But in the second movie, they actually, I forgot how many. They tell how many bullets it took to kill him, because they're all holes in his trench coat. And I think it's like over 50 bullets. And and but he doesn't last as long as some John Woo and Sam Peckinpah character. Now, Sam Peckinpah, to be clear, was the first guy who did this. Had people living with numerous bullet holes and still moving around. The Wild Bunch is a great case, and we're going to talk about another case shortly with Chris here. But Peckinpah popularized that. Wu stole it, but Wu took it to incredible lengths. And Wu does shot for shot from Wild Bunch a lot, but he does it in the modern day, to be fair, with Asian guys and handguns and shit, and modern firearms. But similar vibe, and a similar vibe in the Wild Bunch, where you have Borgnine and Holden are the last to survive, and of course then they die, and it's bad when they die. And I guess the implication is they had only finally been hit in a vital area like their heart or something, you know. and when they die, it's really sad. I cried at the end of I always cry at the end of the Wild Bunch every time I watch it. And but Wu wanted to conjure that where you have these two buddies outside the law, like the characters in the Wild Bunch, who love each other and are going to go to the death, and especially is that strong in the killer. But it's in this movie too, but more in the sequel. And this one is pretty much like Mark tries to help him get away, and then he gets killed, and basically he has a way out, and Ho's like, I'll catch up with you. Mark is steering the boat, and then of course Kit and Ho are forced to work together, estranged brothers, and they kind of in between shootouts reconcile emotionally. A lot of it's body language, and it's really beautiful and sad, very melodramatic. Wu's stuff is and that synth score makes it operatic. It's like all these stakes. And I think it's what one of the characters says in one of these movies. It's like, all the stakes to the death. We know we're not going to make it, but what the hell, we're going to do it anyway. And that's their attitude, just like the Wild Bunch. So I really feel like the killer especially updated the Wild Bunch. And I really, actually, on my list of favorite movies, they're almost kind of neck on neck. I almost kind of put them as one kind of thing sometimes. But in A Better Tomorrow, Mark turns around and he goes to rescue the brothers and gets blown away 100 times or whatever. And they're both shot too, but Ho surrenders. And he even lets Kit do the cuffing. But it's cool. Ho's like, I'm going to surrender again. Going to go back to prison. But I'm okay because my brother loves me again. And the brother's like, not only did I get my collar, but I got my brother back. So it's all good. And it ends pretty abruptly. Some of the context I just said doesn't get really elaborated onto the sequel, but you kind of draw that conclusion. So that could have been the last one. And I'll get to another one later. But what do you guys think of this movie, or any thoughts on John Woo or this period with Chow Yun-fat, or just in general about this kind of film?
I remember it was a phenomenal time. As much as I didn't get into it personally, all that to any great extent, it was hard to avoid,
Yeah.
And hard not to get at least a little bit sucked up into. And if you had any appreciation for, like you said, that '80s look, and into the '90s and everything, you had to love it to a certain extent. You had
Yeah.
to. And I certainly did. And there were things that I could have probably done without, but like the songs, whatever. To me, it's probably better that they cut those things out, but
Right.
just to keep things moving a little bit more. But
But that music really is iconic. You can't get
absolutely,
it out of your head. That melodies on the synth.
right, right. So and as I've gotten older, I think I've learned to appreciate the happy ending more than I used to. I think I kind of reveled in the you know anti-Hollywood ending or whatever, but now I kind of like to see the happy. So it was sad, and it was unfortunate the way some of these things ended up, but no less beautiful, no less. I mean, they were incredible.
Well, I will say that the Better Tomorrow movies individually have kind of relatively happy endings. I mean, whether
Yeah,
they someone goes to prison or not. Now, obviously, Chow Yun-fat was doomed in the first movie, but that was deliberate. That was part of the arc. He has to die so that
right,
the brothers can reconcile, essentially.
of course.
And but now the killer, I think Danny Lee makes it out, the cop, but nobody else makes it out.
Right.
And Hardboiled, the cop survives too. Hardboiled actually was the first one where I think he had sort of a happy ending. I'm pretty
But
sure both protagonists live, though they've been shot a few times. Not as many times as the earlier films, but
yeah,
they do get shot. But that's a change. Chow Yun-fat's now the superhero himself. He's not the anti-hero or the bad guy. Usually the anti-hero, because even if he's the bad guy, you still love him. But in Hardboiled, he's the cop. But he's the classic cop who goes against all the rules, like Dirty Harry. He's like, I'm gonna get justice, and of course, he's always in trouble with his boss and all that stuff.
right.
So, what do you think, Chris? Before we move on.
Yeah, I love those films, and I remember when Better Tomorrow 1 and 2 came out. I think Time Magazine had full page on it, and it's like, if you guys love shootouts, you won't believe these movies. And I've always loved shootouts, and I loved them. It was great. And then The Killer came out,
Did you see The Killer in the theater, Chris?
Yeah, I think I saw them all in the theater.
I
Yeah,
remember when The Killer was in the theater. That's the first time I ever heard. And I didn't know
yeah,
John Woo and Chow Yun Fat's names by heart then, but I remember. I think it played here a week, maybe. Um,
yeah.
and there were people who were freaking out, like local critics who were like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, and the thing was, when The Killer came out, there was also a cut to death version of it. Was it that or Hard Boiled, where they re-released it in America? But I mean, you could see the splices go by, and it was
It
just
may have been both of them.
horribly,
I can't remember which one more than the other.
yeah, horribly censored. But
See,
they was
I never saw the censored versions because by the time they came to VHS, they were so popular,
yeah.
and they didn't have any sexual content, so they pretty much kept them as they were.
Now
Even though this was a period when that level of violence would be NC-17 in America, I think they were unrated
yeah,
on VHS. I mean, Blockbuster had them and they were unrated and they were uncut. But the one I saw with Dwayne was a bootleg. It was trying, it was in Cantonese with subtitles, and it wasn't a pre-record, but I think the pre-record was probably already out by then on VHS, but
yeah.
I don't know if that was initially uncut, but he had the uncut. So I actually have never seen the cut versions of those movies. I've just read about them.
But that was good because the cut versions played in America,
Hmm.
like Blood for Dracula and Flesh for Frankenstein, and they were just cut to ribbons. It was just horrible, but they were still incredibly popular in the theaters. People went.
Yeah, a lot of movies nobody knew were cut back then.
Yeah, right. Didn't realize going in they were watching something that was.
Well, you were, as we were talking about last session, you were part of that generation like Tim Lucas who started to tell people, "Hey, you actually really haven't seen these movies yet."
Right? Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure.
Like The Beyond. Americans had only seen Seven Doors of Death. I know many people who went to see Seven Doors of Death at this drive-in called the Queen Park. It used to be on South Boulevard, Marksman,
yeah,
and not far from my last home. And I know some older people, like friend of the show, Tim McLean. He went to see all those movies in Charlotte at the drive-in theater, and Fulci was big with black people. I mean, black people, they were mainly black audiences because, South Boulevard is a very diverse area now, but it's always been largely African American. It's actually probably more African American now than it was then, but it has more like middle class and upper class black Americans. But back then it was like the hood was behind the theater. And those guys, and they would talk about it at school. So I would hear about this stuff at school, and I have no clue what they were talking about. Mm-hmm. I had an older friend, Nathan, an African American guy, and he's the first guy who turned me on. Well, even though I resisted it because I thought it sounded disgusting at the time. Now I love it, but he turned me on to "I Spit on Your Grave." He saw it in the theater, and he had to tell me about it, and I was appalled. But I was very squeamish, and he's the first guy who played me Prince, and I was appalled by the soft and wet lyrics. And I was like, "Are these really the lyrics, Nathan? Are you making these up?" He's like, "No, listen, man." And he contended that Prince was gay because he wore lingerie. And I'm like, but he's talking about having sex with women. And Nathan's like, yeah, I guess he's had sex with women, but he's still a punk, man. That was he meant punk as in prison term punk, like a guy who's been,
right.
Guy. But yeah, this Fulci, we didn't really see the uncut Fulci in America much until the 90s. And, so probably same with John Woo. By the time those VHSs started selling in America, they were finally like uncut. But great period, great movie to kick that off. A lot of imitators, a lot of really good ones that weren't John Woo. A lot of which had Chow Yun Fat, and then some not so good ones that weren't John Woo. But all of John Woo's were tight and up to hard boiled, in my opinion. Better Tomorrow. Now I still haven't seen A Bullet in the Head, which a lot of people say is this absolute masterpiece.
That's another very good one. Yeah, that's his Vietnam movie, and it's very, very good.
I did read this week that he made that as a retort to Choi Hark, because I'll get more into this when I do Better Tomorrow 2, but they had a massive schism during Better Tomorrow 2, and Choi Hark's like, well, fuck, I'm the producer, I own the rights, I'm going to make Better Tomorrow 3, and I'm going to make it a prequel in Vietnam. Again, I still haven't seen that film either to this day. And so John Woo was like, well, fuck you, I'm going to make a better Vietnam movie, A Bullet in the Head. And most people seem to think that Bullet in the Head is better than Better Tomorrow 3. And
Yeah.
Better Tomorrow 3 maybe is not up to par with the other ones. Maybe didn't need to be made. Now, to be clear, Better Tomorrow, the first one has been remade twice. First in Korea, I think around 2010, and then more recently, in the last few years, in Hong Kong again. Well, it's mainland China now. I do want to say one more thing about it, which I found out was interesting while we're on the subject of remakes. A Better Tomorrow itself is a remake. It's a remake of a 1967 Hong Kong movie by Patrick Lung Kong called The Story of a Discharged Prisoner. Not seen it, never heard of it until this week. I didn't research very deep, obviously. It also has elements of a movie called The Brothers, Hong Kong from 1977 by Hua Shan, which does star young Danny Lee, who did go on to be in The Killer as the cop. The Brothers I've heard of. I did not really realize, but now I kind of see it. I haven't seen The Brothers, but I've read about it before. So they took that central motif of the two brothers on the opposite sides of the law from this 1979 film, The Brothers. Now, The Brothers itself is a remake of an Indian movie from India by Yash Chopra called Dewark from 1975. Again, I haven't seen it. I'm very eager to see that one. So Dewark is the earliest template is the story of a discharged prisoner in the 60s. Mid 70s was Dewark. Late 70s was The Brother. And then I guess Choi Hark and John Woo kind of mashed it all together and then came up with their own character names and all that stuff. So that's what I got on The Better Tomorrow.
Sorry.
Hi, you've been watching Deep Images. I'm Henry Covert, your host. This is Briggy Williams and C.F. Robbers, two of our most amazing panelists. And we've been talking about an incredible series here. We do these series sessions every so often. We break them into individual episodes. So we wanted to kind of give you a segue and let you know what you've just watched and what you can look forward to. So just want to remind you, thank you for watching. And please like and subscribe and support the channel any way you can. You guys have anything to say?
Yeah, like, subscribe, come back, see us. We don't bite. Type, type, type.
Do you like that? We like that. Let me tell you something. Leave some comments.
Hell yeah.
Leave something in the chat. If you like us, talk to us. If you don't like us, talk to us. We want to hear from you.
All right. Y'all have a good evening. Thanks for watching.
And it's true that we cannot see that far behind. If we looked all the way in the past, we'd go blind. In the night, from the stars as they've all lived their lives, and the light that they gave as they burned and then died.